This was Zach, right?
Yeah, it was.
Okay, thank you, Zach. Yes, absolutely correct. So the answer is C, subject to the dual rational nexus standard. Some local governments have impact. I've worked for places that have them. I've also worked for places that don't. And with that said, looking at these questions and when you're studying from just what the definitions are, what the intent of something is, rather than making it too personal, I think that this question is one where my example of making it too personal doesn't really apply, because impact fees are what they are. But this is something that is imposed on a development, as Zach said, not going to be done prior to approval, but post-approval, depending on what it is. They cover things like road, sewer, infrastructure, schools, parks, fire protection, et cetera. It can run the gamut for what it is. But depending on state legislation, local jurisdictions do have the authority to collect those fees at the time of approval prior to development. So good job, Zach.
And I think, Zach, you know, the rational nexus, I mean, there's really two things that allow impact fees, right? And that's a huge one, rational nexus and rough proportionality. So there's been many court cases that have tested that. So as you're studying law, that you might see that come up as well. So I think that was a really good way to, sorry, I keep forgetting to highlight this. Really good way to get to the right answer. All right, next question. A successful strategic plan will focus on a limited issue, problem, or project. Identification of a SWOT, outline resources that can be used to achieve goals, and do what? Okay, we see some B's. That is correct. Yes, Ethan, I hope B as well.
All right, a variance can be described as what? Seeing a lot of A's, and yes, the answer is A. So this is one of the questions that Aaron and I have talked about a lot in the past, where you know, not making it too personal. I've worked for a jurisdiction that had a board of zoning appeals. I've also worked for a place that had a board of adjustment. Don't let those things trip you up, because depending on where you work, they may serve in very different forms. And so it's not something to really get focused on. In this situation, a variance is something when you're looking at the ordinance as a whole, what are the requirements? And a property owner is not able to adhere to them because of in some cases, it could be some crazy situation, the way that I've described it, which is pretty far-fetched. But if you have a lot, someone wants to put a building on it, but there is a canyon that runs directly through the middle of that property. Therefore, they can't meet setbacks. Where are they going to put the building? I want to seek a variance because I can only enjoy the rights of my property on a very specific portion of it. So with that said, seeking relief from what established regulations are in place because they have some sort of hardship. This could be many different examples, but that's just the one that I give because it's something that's kind of served me well. So any questions on this one before we go forward?
I think the biggest thing to remember when you have questions on variances is, again, tying back to the land use law that you're studying, the 4-part variance test. There's a lot of different ways that communities, so to Morgan's point, not to personalize, there's a lot of different ways that communities can approach modifications or exceptions or things of that nature. But when the exam is asking you about a variance, that is a very specific thing. So understand what the criteria, that 4-part variance test, understand what those are and how they might be applied. And then that's really what you want to think about. Yeah, Mark.
So many buttons pushed. I'm sorry. I totally looked the other way and I missed the answer for this impact fees.
It's C. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because that was one of the few ones that I really struggled.
Yeah. So again, just remember impact fees. I mean, you've got to have, there has to be a rational nexus and proportionality to what you're charging. And so communities, communities approach this differently, but there's always going to be a study that kind of sets the fee, and that those are the standards that they're using in order to do that.
Is impact fee a form of exaction?
An impact fee is its own fee, right? So you would say, okay, based on the growth that we're going to see in our transportation system, this is obviously grossly oversimplified, but the contribution of the new growth is going to result in the need for X new roads and lane miles. So we can figure out how much that's going to cost, and then we can assign the percentage of budget, of money that's going to be needed to build that to the new homes, and then that becomes the impact fee, right? And so the nexus between that is growth of the system with growth of people, and then the proportionality is like, how much are you charging them versus how much is the full system, right? Essentially. Okay. Okay. Of the following growth management techniques, which would likely be used to reduce development density? What would you do to reduce development density? Okay, C, large lot zoning. Yep. Okay, it looks like everyone got that pretty good.
Okay, question 10. For which of the following demographic groups is a mail survey instrument most effective? So the answer is A. Earlier we had a question about the order of generations from youngest to oldest, and Aaron made the point of being mindful of how those different groups best receive information. So is that through the newspaper, social media, preference of having a phone call versus a quick email? This is an example of what she was referring to. So in this situation, a mail survey. Now, I will say I do not fall into the senior citizen category just yet, but I get very excited when I come home and see that there's mail. So maybe this doesn't totally apply to me, but being mindful of what groups of people are going to check their mail, be aware of having it. And I say that from the perspective of, I'm sure that when many of us were in college, you probably had a mailbox, and how many times did you check it? But knowing that there are various ways of getting messaging out, and as a planner, who is going to best receive that information? So there are many jurisdictions that may have a poster on site with a QR code. So that's serving a dual purpose, multiple generations, to stick to what we've been focused on, of how they're receiving that information. So in this situation, who is going to, what group is the most effective in receiving mail surveys? Senior citizens. That doesn't mean that they're the only ones who are going to benefit from that, but thinking from the perspective of who is receiving the information and how to get, how to connect with them. Are there any questions or thoughts on this? Bridget?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if there's some sort of standard to follow for these different age groups or generations, because I mean, we can make assumptions based on our knowledge, but like, man, I couldn't tell you middle-aged couples versus apartment dwellers. That could be the same thing to me. So I just wasn't sure, like, how are you basing the answer? I mean, for senior citizens, that makes sense, but if the question was tailored differently, if it was an email survey, like, I'm just trying to think about like how to answer it if it was a little bit different.
Bridget, the thing you have to think about is like, what is the best answer, right? And so to Morgan's point, I mean, I'm a middle-aged couple, like I would respond to a mail survey. It's not that you wouldn't use that for the other groups, but really what this is trying to get at is, generally when you think about engagement, there is more of a digital divide with seniors, right? Fewer seniors use I mean, this is sort of changing, right? But if you were thinking about it, there may be the ability for fewer seniors to use technology, and therefore a mail survey might be more appropriate. To your point, if it said, which of the following is an email instrument most effective? I mean, that would be frankly a harder question, because you'd be like all of the above. But I think, you know, when I look at this question, I'd say I'm going to immediately eliminate minorities, because it's too broad. Like, that's not a group across the board, right? Like, different minority groups might use and process information differently. So that to me is an irrelevant answer. Apartment dwellers, generally, like, apartment dwellers move more frequently. And so while you might want to have a notice of a public hearing be mailed to apartment dwellers to make sure, a survey probably isn't, a mail survey might not be as appropriate, because they're more mobile, right? And then you're left with like middle-aged couple and senior citizen, and you say, well, generally older generations consume printed materials more than younger generations. So that's why I would go with senior citizens. And Zach, that's a great point. It's harder sometimes to reach apartment dwellers, particularly if you're using like assessor data for your mailings. You know, you could certainly just mail to all addresses in an area or a community, but that's another great point of why you would probably eliminate apartment dweller from this question, because you wouldn't necessarily have, even if you're using like your utility bill information, like apartments might not have the individual person. So that's kind of how you would approach that question. Does that make sense, Bridget?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Morgan, on this one? We're good. Okay, so green infrastructure. Okay, we've got a lot of A's, which is correct.
Okay, Supreme Court cases. So, number 12, in which case did the Supreme Court say that a community may prohibit unrelated individuals from living as a family in the same house? Tess and Ethan are on fire, very quick. I'm giving them a little bit more time.
Ready to unveil?
So the correct answer is B, Village of Belterre. And so and we'll talk more about this in the tips and tricks section, but with Supreme Court cases, one of the recommended approaches that I have is to memorize, but also make connections where there are some cases that could be similar to others. So in this situation, Moore versus Cleveland was focused on a zoning ordinance that prohibited a grandmother from living with her grandchild, that it's unconstitutional. Let's see, C, TVA, the court's first interpretation of the Endangered Species Act of 1973. And then let's see, like these are kind
April
of,
was like a takings case.
Yes.
So we had a few people kind of going back and forth between A and B. I think the key here is the unrelated, right? Because Moore versus Cleveland was really a grandmother case, a grandchild case, right? So they were related.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
And sorry, I finally got my mic working.
Yay.
So sometimes when I don't know these, because for me, these are like flashcard ones usually, but I obviously haven't taken the AICP exam. Are they usually this close in date? Because sometimes I'll use like what I know was going on in the world at that time, or what I think I know, right? Like environmental stuff was being passed at a certain time. It was really popular. Housing stuff was popular at a certain time. Civil rights stuff was popular at a certain time. So like in your experience, are they usually kind of spread out? Is that something that I can actually use, or are they generally pretty close together like this?
I mean, I think that's a good first blush, but like there was a ton of housing cases, a ton of environmental cases all at the same time. These aren't actual test questions. And there are many different versions of the exam. So the test that I took, in 2007 is different from the test that you'll take. You're not going to have 100 law questions. So if this is something that's really challenging for you, I'd say just keep using your flashcards. And I know when I took the exam, I did create like a document with all the law cases. It's not, and I think it might be on our website, or I'm happy to share it with you. It's not completely up to date because it stops in 2007, but I think, Ethan, that's a good first, like it's maybe a way to organize the information, but I think it's going to be maybe a little challenging to do only that.
Works for me.
Real quick, this is Brynhilde. Sometimes what I do too is I'll look, and if I know some of the other cases very well, say for like process of elimination, like, okay, I know this case was specifically with this and it would not apply to unrelated individuals, right? And kind of just going through and breaking down each case, and like, I remember this about this case and that case, and then trying to process of elimination sometimes helps too.
That's a super great suggestion. Like you could say, most of us know the TVA was an Endangered Species Act. So you're like, obviously it's not C, right? So that's a really good suggestion.
Also, when you're looking at these, plaintiffs go first. So in this case, the city is telling the individual no. So the city is a plaintiff.
Interesting. Okay. It's a good tip, Jerry. Thank you. Okay. I think this is me. Carrying capacity is a concept associated with whom? All right, we've got one person. Good job.
Mm.
To be fair, the landscape architecture, one of their 4 exams does include Ian McHarg as well.
Yeah.
So I've read him many times at this point.
So his book was Design with Nature, and that
Yes.
was really pretty, instrumental in kind of the ecology and obviously designing with nature movement. So, really thinking about, if you're thinking about how to study for this, thinking about sustainability, carrying capacity, what is that concept? It was introduced, really thinking about, he didn't come up with the concept, but he really talked about it in his book, Design with Nature, and talked about the maximum population that an area, an environment or location can sustain without environmental changes. So just kind of understanding all those concepts. And then again, to the earlier point, if you know who Andres Duany is most closely associated with, like new urbanism, you can kind of start to eliminate some of the others if you don't know this. All right, let's move on.
So we're an hour in. Do we want to take a bio break?
I'd say let's go for like 20 more minutes and then take a break halfway through. Is that cool?
I don't know if y'all can hear me, so I wanted to test my sound with you, Erin, but we'll keep going. And the question that was brought up, the comment about Henry Bideker's, we will go over that in the tips and tricks section after we finish going through all the questions. So just so y'all know, we are not ignoring that question. We will go over it. So number 14, y'all can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. In drafting a neighborhood plan, what is the most efficient and effective way to ensure that the interests of all groups have been addressed? And I see that we had some responses. The answer is B, conduct focus group meetings in the neighborhood to discuss plan concepts and issues prior to drafting the plan. Are there any thoughts for anyone on the call who is focused in long-range planning that would like to talk about this?
B is the only one that talks about getting feedback prior to drafting the plan. The other three talk about surveying after you have a draft or during the drafting process. So B is like getting ahead of what the community wants before you put in a bunch of work to it.
Yes, very, very good point, Zach. So with long-range planning, in some situations, there may be something where the city knows exactly what they want and have some ideas, but in a true neighborhood plan, the focus should be the residents, participants, business owners, whomever is in the defined area, getting their feedback prior to completing said plan. Because in that situation, it's truly their plan and what they foresee for that defined area. So anything where it's, you wrote it and then send it off to them and tell me what you think about this, probably not the best approach for something like this. And in the beginning, when Aaron was going over the pie chart of the various focuses of the exam, this is part of plan and implementation, areas of focus. But yeah, answer is B. Thank you, Zach.
I think the other key with this one that we've talked about in the past is really all groups. And so some of these are really focused. I mean, you might do some specific engagement with groups, but really thinking about how are you getting input from a diversity of groups. Okay. Planner's primary obligation is what? Yay, good job. Got a lot of C's. Any bonus? Where do you find this? Where is this articulated? Anyone have a thought on that? Yeah, that's right, Ian. Ethan. Sorry, I just called you Ian. I don't know why. I'm talking about Ian.
Don't worry about it. I work with an Ian. It happens all the time.
Yeah, so that is in the code of ethics.
All right, question 16. The intensity of residential land use is typically measured by which of the following methods? Another quick response, the answer is C, dwelling units per acre. Questions on this one? All right, oftentimes zoning will be defined as such where density is shown with how many DUs per acre. Okay.
So on the next question, we're looking for which of the following best describe the composition of the blocks highlighted below, or block highlighted below. Okay, we've got a few C's, which is the correct answer. Does anyone want to just jump on and talk about how they came to that?
I used a calculator, but yeah.
So generally, some things that we've talked about in past prep sessions, kind of understanding the land use colors, right? Yellow and orange is typically, that kind of shade is typically residential. Red is usually used to represent commercial, obviously green, shades of green or parks, open space. So that's kind of a good first stab. And then, even if you don't calculate it, you can kind of see it's probably not the one with decimals. So just kind of going through that. So yes, C is the correct answer. Okay, we're going to go
office
through
red as well.
I think office is.
What was the question?
Is office red? I don't think so. I think
it can be.
It can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go onto APA's website, they have like the land use colors document. I'll pull it up at the break and verify that.
I just did
okay.
I just did a process of elimination, and I typically don't see multifamily in yellow, so that's how I ended up to see.
Yeah, that's a good point, because usually it's like a brown or a dark orange, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, next question.
Okay, question 18. Was there, I don't know if y'all can hear me. Okay, which of the following is not true about a metropolitan planning organization, also known as an MPO? Yes, the answer is A, federally mandated for urbanized areas with a population over 250,000. Any comments on this? I can't recall if anybody on who's participating today works for an MPO.
And really, this isn't correct, right? Because it's 50,000, not 250,000.
I used process of elimination because I've been to so many MPO meetings, so I could say B, C, and D were correct, and A was a little bit unsure about, but 250,000 seemed kind of big for some of the populations of the meetings that I attended.
Perfect.
I have a
Good answer.
They are federally mandated though, right? Because I was
Yes.
thinking that, okay, that's good to know. Because I was thinking in my process of elimination that they were only required for the distribution of funds through MPO, but it's nice to know that they are mandated.
They are. The key in this one is the population threshold. So I think that was Bridget mentioned, they do channel federal funds. You do need an LRTP, and they can have a mix. So really the key here is just remember MPOs are for areas over 50,000. Okay. What type of regulation would impose land dedication, growth management control, and the land recordation process? Okay, we've got a D's, B. So the correct answer is D. I think, so we had a B in there too. You could potentially have parkland requirements as part of your land dedication requirement, but the best answer here is D, because a subdivision regulation would contain all of these things, right? Again, not trying not to personalize this to maybe a jurisdiction you've worked in. But you can start to eliminate, C, you can eliminate pretty much right off the bat. A, there could be some elements of this, but annexation is not necessarily a regulation. So D is the best answer here. Does anyone have questions on this?
So I'd like to make a comment about it, is that each plat requires recordation. And so with that, you refer to the subdivision regulations.
Right. So there's a question, land recordation is like the creation of your lots, right? You're recording what your subdivision is. You're creating the legal description of what that boundary is, of what subdivision you're creating, right? So I'm taking a 35-acre lot and I'm splitting it. I'm recording a subdivision plat to create 2 new lots from that. That's really what land recordation is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Tess?
Yeah.
Okay. So subdivision regulations are a big thing that's typically part of someone's zoning code, someone's land use code. It spells out the process for doing that in conjunction with the jurisdiction, county, state that you're working in. And again, not needing to personalize it. So if you're in Illinois or Colorado, like it might be different, but generally thinking about what subdivision regulations control, and they control all of these things, can control all of these things.
Okay, question 20. An LOS, level of service C, at a signalized intersection indicates what? The transportation planners, your time to shine. Yes, the answer is A, mostly stable flow, but speeds and maneuverability are somewhat constricted by the volume. is anyone on the call who may be a transportation planner or just have a love for the theory of want to go over this and discuss the different levels of service? Or does anybody have any questions about what the levels of service mean, ranging from A through F? Okay.
A complete submission for site plan review should provide each of the following types of information except what? Okay, yes, C. You're not gonna ask an applicant to provide rents. Again, don't personalize this because I know Kayleen works in affordable housing, so she may want that information, but that's not going to be part of the site plan review. So good job.
I can talk about levels of service really fast if you want.
Sure. You were very adamant in your response, Cass, so talk about it.
So the levels of service are based on the AASHTO Green Book, and they're based on letters A through F. It talks about intersection, like the traffic flow of an intersection. And so A is kind of total free flow. It's at or either like above posted speeds. And then B is a little bit less, where it's like reasonable. It's a little bit restricted. And then C is mostly stable or at a near free flow. And then D is approaching unstable flow. And then E is unstable flow. And then F is breakdown of flow. So whenever cars are stopped, travel time really can't be predicted. That's like the worst. So, yeah.
Like I-25 when there's a crash at rush hour.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we did this one. So we're going to take a break after question 24. So then we'll be halfway through the exam.
All right, which of the following best describes Clarence Perry's neighborhood unit? Yes. There we go. Okay, yes, the answer is A, a self-contained residential area bounded by major streets with shops at the intersection and a school in the middle. And further elaborating on this, this theory, I suppose, also includes the dedication of at least 10% of the neighborhood land area to parks and open space. Any questions on this? Okay.
So for these types of questions, again, maybe you know what a neighborhood unit is, maybe you know who Clarence Perry was. Those are ways that you could, if you knew one but not both, probably unlikely, but kind of process of elimination. I just want to go back to Bryn's comment, speaking about transportation. She also recommends understanding roadway classification. So that's a helpful concept to understand from a transportation planning perspective, possibly also like volume to capacity, how that works with level of service and, just kind of those general transportation planning concepts. And if you have questions, we've got some, it sounds like great transportation planners on this call, so might be a good resource to connect with. Okay, which of the following is a landmark housing case? Okay, that's correct. So in this case, the plaintiffs, as Jerry mentioned, are first. So that's really helpful. Thank you again for that tidbit. Were poor minority citizens who wanted decent low to moderate income housing. And they were forced to move elsewhere because there wasn't suitable housing in the village. They argued that the township excluded them from the municipality through land use regulations. And basically, zoning must promote general welfare and can't be motivated by other considerations, such as property tax rates. The other cases, just again, kind of going back to your comment, Ethan, process of elimination, Hadachak was a zoning case, as was Ambler. I think that's probably a case most of us know. And then Berman versus Parker was a takings case. So process of elimination, maybe you didn't really know the Mount Laurel case, but you knew the others. You could ascertain that this was the housing case.
Okay, 24. What section of the Code of Ethics would one find the principles to which we aspire? Yes, the answer is A, section A. This is one of those where my suggestion is to look through the Code of Ethics and memorize, committing it to memory in whatever way makes sense for you, which I'll go over later in our session today. But are there any questions on this one? All right.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to leave this slide up. It's 10:17. Let's take a short break. How long do you guys want? You want to come back at 25? You want to come back at 30? Okay. Let's come back at 10:25. I'll leave this up. This will be our next question. And we'll see you all in a few minutes. Morgan, do you want to
can you
test your phone?
Yeah, can you stay on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to keep using it. I don't know if y'all can hear me.
I can hear you. I'm guessing it was I think the problem was on my end. So drop it with your phone and see if we can hear you.
Okay. Hopefully I can just hang up on my phone and then it'll leave the
Because
you're
on with your computer, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah, let's see what happens. Hanging up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Are you kidding me? Aaron,
Sorry.
oh my
I'm
God.
so sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Using my phone, everybody sounds kind of muffly. And so whenever I was talking, there were people that would talk over me. And I thought, I don't know if anyone can hear me at all. So,
No,
okay.
We could hear you fine, but I'm sorry that happened.
No, it's totally okay. I'm glad that this works because I was also worried my computer's broken. Okay, I'm gonna run to the bathroom and
my mind was broken. That's what was going on.
No, it's not. Okay, I'll be back.
Okay, we'll see you. We'll see everyone.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, we'll get started again in just a second. And I think if I admitted someone, we were just on a quick break. So if you just joined us, we are doing a prep session and we will be back in less than a minute. Do we have the majority of the group back? Okay. Bridget, you and I will start. Okay, I see some thumbs up. Let's go ahead and get started, and then we'll welcome everyone back when they come back. Our next question is an ethics scenario. So you are the newly appointed planning director in the small town of Buckville. Your husband's the new owner of a gardening store that's applying for a construction of a large greenhouse to be built adjacent to the store. So this use is going to need to be reviewed by the Planning Commission for approval. So what do you think you should do as the newly appointed planning director? There's a number of choices. Craft a staff report, invite the Planning Commission to the store to grow flowers, ask your wife to offer flowers to the Planning Commission, or inform the commission about your connection and take yourself out of the review process. So for those of you that thought D, that is correct. So we'll just spend a second. I mean, I think in this case, you know, there's a few that you can probably pretty easily eliminate. Thinking about how you tie back the code of ethics, a lot of what you might see are related to conflict of interest. So definitely take a look at those sections. Any questions on this one? Again, these responses in my mind are, you know, probably a little funny, frankly, but.
What Aaron and I have said before, whenever we've discussed ethics at conferences or wherever we are, when in doubt, just over communicate so there is no perception of anything funny going on.
Did you have something, Zach?
Yeah, if I was the only planning staff in a small town, could I just acknowledge my conflict of interest up front and over communicate it and then still present the case objectively?
Yeah, we've talked about that. You know, a lot of jurisdictions, small jurisdictions have one staff, and that staff may be, you know, the public works director, the fire chief, and the planning director. And so there's not going to be cases when you can assign, there's you might know every single person and have a connection to almost everyone in the community. And B, you know, there's going to be instances when you can't recuse yourself. And so I think you're exactly right. And again, we're not, you know, as we're not the ethics officer, so I'm not giving you formal ethics advice, but I think you're on the right path of, you would just need to disclose that, right? And if you couldn't be objective, then you'd probably need to talk with, you know, whomever that is, the city manager, the mayor, whomever, about having a consultant review it or something. But I think you're exactly right. And to Morgan's point, just communicating what your conflict or potential perceived conflict would be and moving forward as appropriate.
Very good question.
Oh, hopefully no one saw that.
Oh no, the secret's out. Okay. Question 26. A Fifth Amendment taking occurs when rapid responses. Yes, the answer is B. Government seizes property for a public use. And I have some notes that I'm going to read out. When it comes time for studying, or those who have been studying are probably aware of this, or maybe it's something that you've adopted in your study practice. outlining the various amendments and what they focus on and the differences between them. So stick with me. I'm going to read through some information here. So the Fifth Amendment provides that private property shall not be taken without just compensation. While the Fifth Amendment by itself only originally applied to actions by the federal government, the 14th Amendment extended the takings clause to actions by state and local government as well. When the government wishes to acquire property, example, buildings for new roads, it first attempts to buy the land from a willing seller. If the owner refuses to sell, the government may go to court to have the court allow the condemnation and taking of the property by eminent domain. The government must demonstrate that the property is being acquired for public use, and the government must pay just compensation to the property owner. So if anybody wants me to reread any of that, or if you have any questions, throw them out.
And I'll just note the exam, the bigger exam, the 170 question exam that we sent, and we'll provide if you didn't get it. That's from the Florida chapter, and it contains all of these notes. So it's a really good resource. Yeah. And what Morgan just went through will be in the version with the answers. It's got all the notes there. So again, key 5th versus 14th Amendment. Okay. Move on.
Yes. And I'm reading Ethan's comments. Yeah. Oh, friend, we've all been accused of it. So right there with you.
So which housing act focused on slum clearance? We've got a couple C's, which is correct. So Housing Act of 49 was slum clearance associated with urban renewal. 54 was for public housing. 64 was the Fair Housing Act. And 1970 was really around guarantees and lifting the ceiling that made larger projects more feasible. So again, just kind of understanding maybe the sequencing of our housing acts and when things happened.
Okay, sorry. Jerry, I just sent the forward you that email. All right, question 28. Which of the following is the most appropriate instrument for waiving the frontage requirements for a lot located on an isolated hillside? We kind of talked about this earlier. So yes, the answer is a variance. Provided that this is creating some sort of hardship, of course, and that
so in this case, that's a great point, Morgan. What's the hardship?
Yes.
And how did you not create said hardship on your own? That's part of the variance test, right? So it's not your fault. You didn't impose an isolated hillside, right? You didn't create, in theory, you didn't build the hillside up, right?
Right. In theory. Yeah. Questions on this?
Okay.
All right.
So according to ITE's trip generation manual, how many trips per day would be generated by single family homes? As I was sending this out, I was like, we should verify that the trip generation rates haven't changed, because these exam questions are, maybe Kat can tell me if, I mean.
I think I looked at it the last time we did it, and they're either the same or very, very close. Different. Yeah. So transportation planners, another call to you. Let us know if this is wildly incorrect.
So we've got a couple A's, which is the correct answer. Does anyone want to, for those of us who aren't transportation planners, generally talk about how you know this, even if you're not familiar with ITE's trip generation, and maybe more importantly, kind of what some of the thinking behind trip generation is, in case there's other questions like this on your exam. So I'll kind of provide an overview, and then my transportation planning friends can correct me. But generally, you can think about it. There are certain types of land uses that have higher trip generation rates. And from a residential standpoint, single family has the highest trip generation. So the other rates here, like a lower density, maybe single family attached low rise apartment would be in that 6.7 or 6.6% range. Higher density multifamily would be in the 4 range. And so you can kind of use the rule of thumb as buildings get taller, as things get more dense, the number of trips decreases, which you can think about makes complete sense because there's more opportunities for transit. There's more opportunities for walk trips. There's less opportunity for parking, free and abundant parking. And so those all have an influence on the number of trips created. From a non-residential standpoint, you can sort of think about it similarly. Like a medical office might have the highest of the office trip generation rates because you have patients coming every 30 minutes, right? Versus like a call center where a bunch of people come in the morning and leave in the afternoon, but you don't have customers coming. So similarly, retail and restaurants would have higher than office. Certain uses like maybe data centers would have very low trip generation rates because they don't have a lot of employment. Whereas maybe a shift manufacturing would have somewhere in the middle because again, you don't really have customers, but you have people coming during shift changes. So think about land uses and sort of what the activity is with it. And then you can use your rule of thumb to get to trip generation. You don't need to memorize trip generation rates, like don't do that. Just generally understand what types of uses generate what types of trips. Okay. So if you think about mixed use, or, maybe residential, I think the way you would do it is you would sort of calculate trips by residential type. So you could sort of apply the same line of thinking, Maria, if you said, I've got, 100 acres that's going to develop as a mixed use development. It's going to have 50 of those acres are going to be single family detached. That's going to generate quite a few trips. 10 acres is going to be high density residential adjacent to a transit stop. That's going to be a lot less. And so I don't think they're going to ask you a type of question like, figure out, do a traffic study and figure out how many trips this development is going to generate. But you could kind of say like the more dense, the more units are in a concentrated area, the fewer trips there's going to be. That's like the most important concept. Lower density suburban is going to generate more trips than kind of mixed use. No, and trip generation is for all land uses. So again, thinking about what's a church going to generate? Well, a church is going to have a lot of trips on a Sunday and maybe a Wednesday, right? They're going to have a lot of trips in the morning, but they're not going to have a lot of trips throughout the week. So thinking about, and for those of you who have been in the public sector who review development applications, this is what the kind of information you're going to see in your traffic study. And certainly I am not a transportation planner. So if anyone that actually knows what they're talking about and is a transportation planner wants to provide more guidance, or alternatively, if you have questions about this, if there's anyone that's a transportation planner that'd be willing to be a resource, maybe just drop that in the chat because I know it's not something, if you don't work in that realm, but it is something that every land use has. If you go look at the manual, every land use is going to have a trip generation rate. To your point, Zach, it's not just for residential. It's going to be all non-residential uses, all residential uses. Okay, let's go to the next question.
Okay, number 30, who is involved with an organizational approach that has invitations sent out by the neighborhood or organization and a paid organizer is then sent to the neighborhood? So I think the key with this one is the paid organizer is part of the public process. And the answer is B, Saul Alinsky. So I don't really have much feedback on this one. This is one of those where if memorizing is your thing, it kind of is not fun, but just looking through all of those key players in the history of planning, public participation. There are several different processes that are part of planning itself. And with this one, again, the key is the paid organizer that serves in the role of facilitation. Okay.
Which of the following is true about the planning process in most jurisdictions? Again, thinking about this generally, in most jurisdictions, what is true about the process? So staff has authority, governing body writes the ordinance, planners establish policy, or a body of appointed citizens or residents oversees the plans. We've got, okay. So in most jurisdictions, there is a body of appointed residents, a commission, so to speak, that oversees plan implementation. And that may be in state statute, that may be a local. Most jurisdictions have a planning commission that oversees the implementation of comprehensive plans. So B, the governing body writes the ordinance. I would say if this were different and said the governing body enforces the ordinance, that would be probably a reasonable answer. But the thing that I would say with this one is typically the governing body isn't writing the ordinance, right? Staff is writing the ordinance, they're adopting it, they're enforcing it. Does that make sense? And then, typically staff don't have final authority. I mean, in A, staff has authority on some, administrative decisions, but generally a commission, a board, something like a council would have final authority on those types of discretionary decisions. And then obviously C, I think you'd throw out, because what you need your goals before you establish your policies, right? And if you have questions, thank you, Cass, for sharing trip generation and the model. There's a resource in the chat. Okay, let's go to the next question, which is another fun scenario.
Yeah, we have a long one. So number 32, you are a village planner scheduled to attend a plan commission meeting to provide a staff recommendation on a PC case. Prior to the meeting, you receive a phone call from a friend and colleague who's a planner in a nearby community. She tells you that she has some dirt on the petitioner's schedule to present said case. She says you won't believe your ears, and that although this information is confidential, you just have to hear it. You are afraid that this could impact your staff recommendation. What should you do? So our options are here. Let me know if you need to see the question again. Excellent. Yes. So the answer is D. Tell her that if she has anything to say, it should be done during public comment during the planning commission meeting. So this goes back to what we had talked about a couple of minutes ago. If there is ever, this thought of this could be a conflict, or I don't want to be a part of this, just it's better safe than sorry. Can be kind of weird if it's your friend to just be really straightforward and say, hey, while I love gossip or whatever your approach is, that I'm in the middle of this case and it's really not appropriate. So if you have something that needs to be shared, please do so during public comment. There's also a thought in this case where if there truly is something that needs to be said that could sway the decision one way or another, or there really is an issue, it definitely needs to be made public rather than shared in a gossiping type of situation. So with the different answer options that we have, listen to what she has to say. You're a planner and responsible for the public interest. While yes, that is true, when it's presented in a way that it's more gossip in fashion and, oh my gosh, you've just got to hear this, it's probably not something where, oh, it's very crucial that I'm the only one that receives this information. B kind of expands on that. tell her to come to your office so you can hear it face to face. It's best just to not engage in that type of interaction. C, provide her time to present this information to your planning commission during executive session. So executive session is something that's typically not open to the public. And in this case, if there is information that needs to be shared specific to whatever is happening, it should not be done in, again, a secret manner, but rather in a public fashion. So therefore D is the correct answer.
Okay, I know we have quite a few environmental planners on the call. Environmental impact statement can be defined as which of the following? All right, B is the correct answer. Great job. So an EIS is written to satisfy the requirements of NEPA when a major action will have a significant impact on the environment. Any questions on this? I think understanding, you know, sort of NEPA and what the process for environmental assessments and then environmental impact statements is a good thing to generally understand. Understanding what a finding of no significant impact or a FONSI is, just sort of generally, even if you're not in environmental planning or you don't do NEPA for your job, which I think we have a few folks on the call who do, understanding what those concepts are and when you might apply them and when something else would trigger something else. Yeah,
I have
Ethan.
a question. Oh,
go ahead, Zach.
Environmental impact report, that would be a precursor to the EIS, right? So you submit an environmental impact report to say whether or not we need an EIS or it's good. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think, and if someone else can jump in, I'll take a shot at this. You know, you do an initial environmental assessment, or I think an EIR is similar. And then if there's some sort of finding that suggests there could be more extensive, you know, from that, you'd either have a finding of no significant impact, or you'd have something that you would need to do a full environmental impact statement of. I can't remember who's a NEPA planner on this call or who does maybe does environmental planning for their job. Do you guys want to jump in? Yeah, Bridget.
Yeah, that covers it about. There's environmental impact assessment that you can do first as well. And then you can either go into 3 categories: categorical exclusion, which means there's no impact, you can proceed. Environmental assessment means small amount of impacts, and the environmental impact statement is more in the severe side of impacts are expected. And this is just to note, this is all for projects that have federal funding.
Yes. So that's a really great point, Bridget. What we're talking about and what Bridget just eloquently provided, thank you for that. That's when there's federal, it's a federal project, they're federal money, and you need to comply with NEPA. Again, trying not to personalize this because many of you may work in jurisdictions where you do require some type of environmental assessment, and then there may be, you know, a phase 2 or something else required to study and potentially mitigate environmental impacts. But what Bridget described and what the exam will likely cover is going to be those federal requirements associated with NEPA. So just remember that. Okay. Thanks again for that, Bridget.
Right. Uses and structures, pausing for effect, that exist prior to the zoning ordinance and are not in conformity with its provisions are known as what? And yes, this was a quick on the draw. So the answer is nonconformity. Again, not wanting to make this super personal to whatever jurisdiction you may work in currently or have in the past. It could be referred as something different depending on your zoning code. But in general, nonconformities are focused on the uses and structures, so it could apply to both. So let's say they're, you know, prior to major development, there was a lot of land out in the county and there were homes built on it in 1870. And as growth moved towards those areas and properties began to be zoned, let's say that they were zoned to be commercial and residential uses or structures were not permitted in the zone district. depending on how a specific zoning code is worded, so I'm not going to get into too specifics because again, we don't want to make this personal. That may be something that's not permitted in a commercial district, but if it remains as it is, then it's fine. That would be considered the nonconformity. So are there any questions on this one? All right.
Okay, so next question, the polycentric concept is best described as which of the following? All right, great, B. Pretty straightforward, easy to eliminate when you're, if you just understand poly. I mean, you're not going to pick something that is just one. So any questions on this one? I think it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, a planner experiences what may be a violation of the AICP Code of Ethics. Who should they contact for advice? Yes, the answer is C. Now I want to go over this. If there's a situation in the organization that you work and whatever comes up, you absolutely can talk with your direct supervisor, the HR manager, all A through D, you can speak with them. But when there's a situation that is specific to a perceived violation of AICP Code of Ethics, the best route for this specific question is to reach out to the AICP ethics officer. And as mentioned, Aaron and I do various sessions at state conference that are specific to ethics. And we always make the statement, because we have to, where she and I are not able to give ethics advice, and that if there is a situation that comes up, to reach out to the ethics officer. Whenever someone calls the officer, his name is Ralph, great guy, he can offer unofficial advice, meaning, hey, based on what you've said, this is what I think the route would be. If you want to further pursue an official complaint, then it goes to the next step and there are other processes. But in this situation, the focus of the question is if there is something that comes up specific to a perceived violation of the code, to reach out to him. Again, you can talk with any of these people, that's fine. But going through the official process, answer is C.
I have a question, which I think I know the answer to on this one, but not everyone has their AICP certification. So if there is a violation of, say, someone that maybe you work with, or another colleague in a different area, and they are not part of AICP, and you feel that there may be a violation, I assume that is something, of course, you would go to, I'm not really sure, but your direct supervisor. But that's kind of just thoughts on that.
Well, that's a very good question, first of all. The Code of Ethics its specific section applies to all planners and commissioners and anybody that's kind of related to the process of planning. Your consultants, where Aaron and I like to say, be a decent human being and, be ethical just in general, versus very specific expectations for someone who holds their AICP certification. When it's something that, let's say, a commissioner who is not AICP is doing something that is perceived as a violation, that would be something where you could talk with your direct supervisor, making reference to the Code of Ethics, saying, hey, this is the expectation of what they need to adhere to. The hope is that there are trainings where that information is gone over, specific to someone who has their AICP and could then potentially be under investigation. That's focused more on them. So those who have passed the exam are part of certified planner, and then an investigation would begin. In general, Aaron, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Suzanne, I think in this question, they're really talking about a violation of the code. So you experienced me doing something, I'm moonlighting and I'm giving flowers to all the planning commissioners. I'm violating the code and I'm an AICP planner. I'm going to go to the ethics officer. You're going to go to the ethics officer and say, I saw Erin doing this. She's AICP. I need advice. In the other instances, you know, everyone involved in the planning process is held to the principles to which we aspire, but there's no way to, that's not enforceable in the way that like I could have my AICP removed if I violate the code. And so this question is really about an AICP planner violating the code. And there's some nuance to who can bring a charge, who can bring an appeal. And those are things that have changed over time. So, you know, they made changes recently. If let's say you brought a charge against me as an AICP planner, and then they dismissed it, only another AICP planner can bring an appeal, right? So the public can't continually appeal. There is not specific guidance by chapter. We all, as AICP planners, are held to the same code of ethics. And so, again, if you're seeking advice on a code violation, you know, if I witness Morgan doing something, I would call Ralph. Certainly as colleagues, and you know, I think, Suzanne, to your question, if there's something that a planning commissioner or a consultant that's not AICP is doing, those are things that you still would want to bring up, and maybe your city attorney, maybe your planning director, maybe city manager, whomever that is. But there's nothing, you know, there's no, to your question, Cass, if someone does something, you know, I'm working with a consultant who's not AICP, but they're a member of the chapter. There's no chapter rules that they're bound to. I mean, again, like I might not work with them again and say like, hey, you know, I might confront them and say, hey, you know, the principles to which we all aspire say this and you're doing this, but there's nothing like legally binding. There's nothing by chapter. So just know the code generally, and it applies across the board.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next question. This is a softball, possibly. Strip of mostly level land bordering a stream or river that may be subject to flooding would be what? Okay, a floodplain, that's correct.
Okay, 38. This question focuses on techniques to address. Sorry, I was reading in my head trying to think what. So this question focuses on techniques to address articulated goals and policies of a suburban town of 35,000 inhabitants. Which program is likely to be used to address the goal of increasing affordable housing? I am sorry.
Okay, this is a new question.
Yeah, but it looks great. Great job, everybody. I saw the responses come in quickly. Yes, the answer is B, inclusionary housing program, which is likely to address the community's affordability. Inclusionary housing allows for mixed income communities that provide people with options in housing type as individual lifestyles and incomes change over time. Some jurisdictions use inclusionary zoning ordinances that require developers to produce a certain number of affordable units in order to be approved, frequently mandating 10 to 30% of new residential units to be affordable to low-income residents. Other options may be housing payments in lieu of fees or the provision of off-site affordable housing units. Another approach can be to create a housing trust fund for city-administered affordable housing programs.
So to some of the comments, this is a strangely written question, and like you could just eliminate some of this.
Yeah.
So just don't get tripped up by weirdly written questions. Just read the question, right? And figure out what the actual question that they're asking is. Any other questions besides it being strangely written? Any question on any of the other options? Okay, so the next question, a walkable residential development with a diversity of housing types, a density generally of more than 7 units per acre, with access for vehicles and pedestrians might be known as what? And we're looking for the best answer here. Okay, this one is one that we talk about usually. So a lot of people pick B, new urbanism, which is probably correct. Really the key here is a TOD generally is walkable. It has mix of uses and a transit supportive density. So that's really the key here. New urbanism might have all of these things too, but they might not. Really, the key for me when I look at this is this transit supportive density. They called that out. It has access for both vehicles and pedestrians. Vehicles may be transit vehicles. So this is one of those where it's asking for the best answer. New urbanism is probably true as well. But again, thinking about the information that they're providing to you and why they're providing it. And in this case, it's really that 70 U's per acre, which generally supports transit. Does that make sense? You know, I struggled with this. The question used to say 6 and I upped it to 7 because that's my understanding. I think, frankly, a TOD would be much more dense. You know, I don't, and other people can disagree with me, but I'm not sure that I can identify a true TOD that's 7 units per acre. Although maybe if it's largely not residential, if it, you know, if maybe intensity is measured a different way. But I think generally the rule of thumb, and my transportation planning colleagues can correct me, generally you can't support transit at anything less than 7, right? Yeah, exactly, Nathan. But generally the rule of thumb is like, you know, a traditional suburban development that's like 4 units per acre, you're not gonna be able to support transit. So anything less than 7, like forget about it. So that's kind of what the question's getting at. But to your point, Sam, like a TOD would probably likely be much more, much more, hopefully. Yeah, Bridget.
Yeah, so this is just a general question about the exam and how they write questions for it. How frequent or how often, like, is there an intention to make us always choose the best answer? They're not trying to trick us into the wrong answer. I'm just curious, like, what's the methodology here?
I don't think they're trying to trick you. Morgan, I'll just answer this so that there's no question on, since you're on the exam committee. There's an exam committee that generates questions and that also reviews questions. And so in the beginning, we talked about those 20 questions. They look at like the pass fail rate of questions. And if they're finding that, like, let's say this, so again, this question will not be on the exam, but let's say this was an exam question. And if they found that, like, and I'm pulling these percentages out of thin air, but like 80% of people chose B, right? 100% of our respondents chose B here. They might say, you know what, this is not a good question. No one's getting this right. Everyone's getting new urbanism instead of TOD. We should probably adjust this question, or we should throw this question out. So they're constantly creating new questions. There's a variety of different exams that anyone in the exam, I think there's 3 at any given time that you could get. So there's a whole pool of questions that they're able to pull from, and they're constantly evaluating the efficacy of those. So, you know, to your point, like, are they trying to trick you? No, they're not. But are there sometimes multiple responses that could apply? Yeah, there are. And I think one of my understanding is that with the exam today, you'll have more questions based on a scenario. And so they might put forward like, hey, this is happening in this jurisdiction. And then there might be a number of questions related to that. And so you're not going to see that on these practice tests because they're older questions. So, you know, they're not trying to trick you, but for a multiple choice test, my experience was that usually there's at least 1 or maybe 2 answers that you can throw out, but then sometimes you're really scratching your head to be like, oh, like it could be this, right?
Thank you. That just helps me going into the exam understanding like how to answer questions is like half the battle. Thanks.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that here in just a second, kind of what your strategy is. And we'll also update this question. Thank you for finding that typo. Okay, next question.
Economic base analysis does not include which of the following? Okay. The answer is D. So a huge part of this is knowing what this means. So economic base analysis is the study of cities and regions, which focuses on basic service or export ratios, the ratio of employment in basic activities to employment in non-basic activities, utilizing economic multipliers.
So again, the key, I mean, I don't think we had any economic developers
I don't
on the
think
call. I'll just give a quick overview. In jurisdictions, in counties, states, whatever, you have basic and non-basic. Some people call it primary and non-primary. And essentially it's all related to the economic multiplier, right? So basic or primary industry are those industries where the majority of their revenue is coming in from outside the region. And that creates a multiplier. Whereas, you know, non-primary or non-basic are those, sorry, I'm just reading this and making sure I don't have this backwards. If you have like a local economy, that money's circular, it's staying in, it doesn't generate as much additional economic activity, right? And so when you're looking at basic or primary employment that is bringing money in from the outside, that has a bigger economic multiplier. So those are the concepts that you want to be familiar with when you're thinking about economic base analysis. And you want to know what's your ratio of basic and non-basic industry. Those multipliers will be known as location quotients. And so like certain industries, if you have a higher location quotient, it's generating more revenue in the local economy. Those are concepts you should be familiar with. You don't need to know how to, you're not going to be asked to write an analysis, but just understand those concepts. So let's see.
Job, it's good. Thank you.
So your base analysis would not include demographic, like it wouldn't include an unemployment analysis. That doesn't mean that if you were doing an economic development plan or you were doing a comp plan with an economic chapter that you wouldn't look at unemployment. This is just really an industry study. So it's really looking at the share of basic versus non-basic, primary versus non-primary jobs and what the multiplier effects are, because then you can see maybe where you need to target, right? Like communities want a higher percentage of basic or primary industries because they're bringing in outside money. And so that's really what this is trying to get at. So this is just kind of one piece of an economic study that you would do. Does that make sense? Okay.
I like it. Okay. What is the range of the following data set? D, yes. So the range is the smallest number, well, the largest number minus the smallest number. So 8 minus 1.
So again, just understanding, you know, range, median, mean, mode, like just those are basic concepts that we're probably all familiar with. What can this can be described as a device to provide flexibility within the zoning ordinance. Okay, this is always one that, again, trips people up, and it's tripping this group up in the same way. The correct answer is A. We've talked a little bit about variances in this prep workshop. So the key here, again, a variance can be used to provide relief from a zoning ordinance. It doesn't provide flexibility. Really, a special use permit would provide flexibility because a variance is relief from a hardship. And so again, we're thinking about what is the best answer here. So if this question instead said this can best be described as a device to provide relief within an ordinance, then you might choose variance. But here you're providing flexibility. And so that's a process. You don't have to obtain a variance. You have a different process that provides more flexibility. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions on this one? Okay.
All right, we have another question about notification. So a public meeting is being hosted by a local jurisdiction to discuss a potential new development. How could a planner best communicate to interested parties? So best answer within these options. D. Nathan, yes, the answer is D, mailed notifications to residents within the project vicinity, including the meeting time and location. So reading through this, just, using logic, what makes the most sense? A poster on the door of the facility, how would anybody know to walk past or drive past? Update the website information. How would anybody know to look at the website? Announcing the meeting time on the local news. I like to call myself a grandpa. I love watching local news, but not everybody is going to. So in this situation, again, the best option within this question, mailing notifications to residents within the defined project vicinity.
I mean, you probably would do all of those other things.
Yeah.
So
I think that you should catch all.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. This type of land use can be described as being allowed by right. Okay, so a by right use is a permitted use. Great job. Any questions on any of the others?
Okay, what is the smallest census geographic unit with 100% tabulation of data? Excellent. C, census block. Looks like we're very familiar with that. Okay.
So we've also in the past had some questions around the census. Again, recognize that this is a national exam. They're not going to ask you, in the 2020 census, what's the percentage of Colorado residents that identify as Hispanic? They're not going to ask a question like that. You could be familiar with general census trends. So what trend was observed in the 2020 census, right? Like an aging of our population, more diversity. So there could be general themes. So if you want to take a look and sort of maybe look at growth trends or, kind of demographic trends in general, or things like this, understanding what's the difference between the decennial census and the American Community Survey, like what kinds of questions would you find on the decennial census? Those are the types of, or questions like this, how is data reported? Well, again, thinking back to that research and assessment method, understanding kind of those more general concepts and what each survey is containing are the types of questions, but not, how many people were reported in America in the 1890 census, right? You don't necessarily need to know that type of information. Okay, exactions can be defined as yes, correct, C. So the subdivider's responsibility for public improvements associated with the development. So we talked about this a little bit previously.
Can I ask a quick question on this one, since we talked about impact fees earlier? Are impact fees just monetary, but exactions can be monetary or something else?
Yeah, impact fees are, that's a good question. I'd probably want to take a little time to look at what's the specific difference, but yes, I mean, impact fees generally are associated with something specific, like a school impact fee, community buildings, transportation, parks, fill in the blank. And it's associated with that specific increase on the system use that portion of growth is paying for. Exactions are really, what the developer, the subdivider is going to pay for, they're going to pay for the half of the arterial associated with their development. So that's, I mean, in a sense, they're all probably paid by the developer, but an impact fee is more, this is how I would describe it. And I can do some more research and get you a better answer, but I think of it as like an impact fee is like paid at the time of building permit for that specific portion of that growth associated with that development, whereas an exaction is something that's overall for the whole development, like the public improvements associated with it. I'm going to I don't know. Does anyone else that works in local government, maybe current planning, want to weigh in here and talk about the difference and nuance between exaction and impact fee? I think maybe one key, like an exaction, you don't have to have an impact fee study to do it, to require exaction. Like you could say growth's going to pay its own way. And if you need a lift station to serve this development, like you're going to build that. That's not an impact fee. That's that's something that the development is required because it's a public improvement that needs to be put in as part of the development.
I would also say, like, you can't exact an extra firefighter or a police officer out of a property. That has to be done with an impact fee.
Right.
Exactions are more for things that are tied to the land. So if, as you mentioned, like a lift station needs to be sited on somebody's property to serve an overall like utility plan for the city, that would be an exaction. And if your transportation and mobility master plan says we need a 4-lane arterial and there's currently a 2-lane collector on one side of the property, you can take a portion of their property to serve that use. So those would be examples of exactions.
Yes.
Whereas you can't physically pull a fire truck out of the ground on their property.
That's a great point. And there still has to be that nexus and rough proportionality, right, between them.
Exactly, yeah. They have to pay for a portion of the fire truck.
Okay, just curious. I appreciate that. I'm just trying to think of a way to keep them straight in my head.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we got 2 more questions, and then we'll talk about resources.
Okay, what is a disadvantage to shift share analysis? Yes, the answer is A. It does not discount the effect of abnormal events. So shift share analysis evaluates the strengths and weaknesses of a specific region's industries. It shows how well the region's mix of industries are performing and how well the analysis examines 3 components of regional employment growth, national growth, industry mix, and competitiveness between 2 periods of time. These 3 components are added to obtain the total change in employment of a specific industry. So therefore, with this response, A, it doesn't discount the effect of something that maybe was not anticipated before.
Like COVID, right?
Like COVID.
If you did a shift share analysis in 2019, like you weren't anticipating COVID, right?
Nobody would have known. Yeah.
Okay. So our last question, transfer of development rights or TDRs do which of the following? Correct. D, all of the above. So for the exam, I would look at things, understanding TDRs, PDRs, purchase of development rights, conservation easements. So thinking about those as forms of growth management a lot of us are up here in near Boulder County. That's, there's a specific program. So those are going to be easy for us. But just generally to understand how communities are using these and sort of what they are would be helpful for the exam. Any last questions on this one before we move into resources? I'm gonna turn it over to Morgan. We'll talk through some tips and resources. We've got about 40 minutes left.
First, excellent job, everybody, on the exam. Very good questions. Thank you for speaking up and asking if you needed help on something. And as we get into the tips and resources section, I do want to reiterate, if anybody has the desire to set up a study group or they would like for us to help make a connection, if that is something that you want to do, please let us know. It may be helpful for some to have a study buddy to bounce thoughts and questions off of. I had a study buddy. I typically prefer to study alone and just kind of get crazy with memorization and making up ways to remember things. But in some situations, it can be really helpful to have someone there with you to discuss things that maybe you wouldn't have thought of and different perspectives. So Just putting that
Along
out.
those lines, Morgan, if you're interested, I think we haven't had a great way of doing this in the past. If you're interested in forming a virtual or in-person study group, maybe just put your name and contact information like, hey, I'm here, I want to do an in-person, I'm in Boulder County, I'm in Northern Colorado, or hey, I'm open to virtual. And maybe you guys can connect that way before we leave this call. And then the other thing I'll mention, I think Morgan forwarded the email to several of you. We also have a resource guide. So if you didn't get the email from me earlier this week, make sure to note that in the chat and we'll get that over to you because it does have some of what Morgan's going to talk about. Okay.
Okay. So Erin went over a lot of this information in the beginning, updates and information about the exam itself. For those who maybe have not signed up or just need some extra information, going to the national website will provide additional information on the guide, how to get registered, where you take the exam. So all that information can be found here. And next slide. Okay, so huge part of this, some of us on this call may have recently graduated, are still in school, or they have not been in school for quite some time. And both of those situations are great. It doesn't matter. This exam is for everybody. So with that said, some of us may be getting back into the process of studying. And with that said, trying to figure out, or maybe you already know what your best process is, looking at what you know and what you don't know. So not wanting to focus too much time on things that, oh, easy peasy, I already know this. Don't focus so much on that. Look at the things that are maybe tripping you up with some practice exams and quizzes. Maybe what we went over today, if there are topics where I don't feel really comfortable with that or confident, just do some additional research and what can you find on those topics. When I was studying, there were some questions that continued to come up on the practice exams and quizzes that I was able to find about Native communities. And that was something that I didn't know a lot about. So I went through, just tried to find all these different resources so I could learn more about that and feel more confident. With that said, so we will discuss where you can find practice exams and quizzes, but using that to expose yourself to the structure of what the questions will look like, and just so that you know what to expect. Flashcards is huge. Maybe that's not your thing, and that's totally fine. But for some, using flashcards is really beneficial. And then, as we've talked about, finding a study group. So again, just to reiterate what Erin said, if you're interested in doing that, please let us know, and we will support you in whatever way we can with that. Okay, so as we've kind of talked about, not making questions personal to where you work or have worked in the past, but also please do not memorize the practice questions. When you find a practice exam or quiz, oftentimes those questions are fairly old. Again, the intent is for test takers to become comfortable with the format of the exam. There are some test exams and quizzes out there that may have questions about the 2000 census. Obviously, you don't want to memorize those questions and responses. Do become familiar and recognize that it's something maybe you need to go to the census website. They have general fast facts that you can review. As Erin mentioned earlier, what are those basic trends? So those kinds of things. Read. There is a recommended reading list. I would say that you do not have to buy every book on that list, but just become familiar with what is outlined on that list, or things that maybe you've heard of. The Green Book, for example, for some, using that book is really beneficial. For others, it may not be. And that goes back to figuring out what works best for you. And whenever you're studying, not wanting to do something that's going to frustrate you and move on to a new process or a new trick or something with how you're studying. So next slide.
And I think too, Morgan, reading the, PAS reports, reading the notes, the PAS quick notes, if you have access to those through APA, sometimes those are good to kind of figure out what some of those best practices and trends that might be on the test, you can just kind of skim those as well. I found that helpful.
For PAS reports, you do have to be a member of APA, and I believe you have to be a member of APA to even register for the exam. But if not, maybe talking with a friend who's able to access them if you are not able to do so. With those PAS reports, I would say some are 100 pages. If you want to, you absolutely can read all of them, but most of them have an abstract to give you a general idea of what the report includes. So with study resources, APA National does have information on their website that is helpful. Kind of went over this in the previous slide. I do want to discuss state chapters. So
real quick, Morgan, before you talk about state chapters, I didn't update this slide, but I did update the resource guide. There are a few PDOs and a professor, I think from Georgia, I can't remember where he's from, but they recently did a series of videos, topical videos. And so if you go to exam tips, there's a bunch of YouTube videos that are new as of, the last couple months. And so there's a lot of content that they put some serious time and effort into that is open to you. It's free, it's out there. It's on the resource sheet that we mailed out. I apologize. I just am now realizing I didn't update this slide, but know that that's a new resource that's out there that can help you. So thank you. Sorry, Morgan.
No, it's totally okay. Because with that said, there are many state chapters that heavily focus on preparing their members for the exam. And so I would encourage you to look at other state chapters that have really great resources. Aaron mentioned Georgia, Florida has a lot. Someone mentioned in the chat earlier, looking at Henry's study sessions. PA has a lot of great resources, Texas. So just becoming familiar, because everybody's taking the same exam. And so there are a lot of approaches that may be different and maybe something that works better for you. Many of the state chapters, so PA, for example, will have, I hope they still have this, they had documents that you could download where it was all of the Supreme Court cases, planning history, historical figures and planning. So a lot of those things that are more memorization that you can download, maybe cut out and put on a flashcard, whatever works for you. So there are some really great things it's open access to anybody who wants to get them from their websites.
And we have that. I mean, I have mine from when I took the test on our website. Again, not 100% current, but we have all of those things on our website. And I will also put a plug in. I mean, the Florida multi-week prep sessions are incredible. And those you just need to email them. Their PDO is changing. So I don't think Henry is the PDO anymore. But I think you can still get access to those. And so if you need help with that, let us know. I will also put a plug in for Texas does a 2-part training session. The first part, I believe, is like I want to say 5 or 6 hour overview similar to this. And that is on their website recorded. And so their PDO has that out there. So just pop around. And thank you for putting the link to Henry's videos in, Sam. Those are really, really go into a lot of depth and content.
I just had this thought. So I went to Texas A&M, and the planning program has done a lot with AICP studying. I'm going to try to find the link. They put it out through LinkedIn the other day. They have a ton of resources. This is a new thing, and I'm really impressed and proud of them for doing this. But there are a lot of resources, podcasts, which I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because there are things that we'll talk about in future slides. But I will try to find that link and send it to you because I believe it's also open access for anybody to look at and use as another resource. So next slide. All right, so Aaron went over the pie chart in the beginning of the different focuses for the exam. This is kind of repeating that information, but focusing on those specific topics. And maybe we've talked a lot about memorization. Maybe that's a way that you're able to absorb information. Maybe it's saying things out loud, making up a funny poem or a song, but with these specific topics, focusing on what you know and what you don't know. I know that was on a previous slide, so a lot of this is somewhat repetitive, but just saying it because hopefully maybe it could stick with someone who's on the call today. And next slide. Oh, Sophie, yes, that's exactly the one I was going to look at. So there is a podcast on Spotify. Sophie, is there a link that if it's easy for you to share in the chat?
I'll try to find it.
Okay, thank you so much. That's so great.
Of course.
I appreciate you doing that so quickly. Okay, so more study resources. We have APA has exam prep that is available for purchase. The same with Planetizen. Whenever I took the exam, I did use the Planetizen study resources. Whenever I took it, I think it was $275. I don't know what it is now. We do have the note on both of these that they are not free, so there is a financial requirement for both of them. But from my experience, when I used the Planetizen, it was a lot of videos, practice exams and quizzes. It broke the study lessons, I guess you could call them, were based off of the different categories that Aaron went over in the beginning, that pie chart. Everything was categorized to match what was on the exam. So if there was an area that I felt like, oh, I don't need to review the ethics, because a lot of ethics is memorizing the code. I don't need to watch those videos again. I don't need to do those practice quizzes. I need to focus on planning practice or, theory, whatever it was. And I could go to those sections and rewatch and redo them. So I'm not saying that I'm sponsored by Planetizen, just sharing my personal experience whenever I used that as a way for my prep before I took the exam. Planningprep.com does have a lot of resources with old exams and quizzes. It's free, but I do want to make the point, as we've talked about before, to please do not memorize any questions. And last that I knew, the exams and quizzes that are on this website are fairly old anyway, but the intent is to, again, allow you to become familiar with the organization of the exam, what you can expect, what types of questions, topics to focus on. So when I mentioned earlier that I was taking a lot of practice exams that were focused on Native peoples and specific acts that I was not familiar with, a lot of that came from these available exams and quizzes. And because I just wasn't familiar, it wasn't something that was covered in the study thing that I was using off Planetizen. I just did my own research on it. Next slide. I believe someone who's on this call today said they watched some of our older recordings, which is great. Thank you. We do save, so today's recording will be saved on APA Colorado's YouTube page. With YouTube, there are other resources that are not just ours. So we have recorded these. We've been doing these trainings, I think, for the past maybe 5 years, Aaron, I think. So after today, we'll have 10 different recordings up, and it is in its entirety available for anyone to watch. But there are other chapters that do have something similar on their YouTube pages. And I would recommend just, if that's something that's helpful for you, just searching on YouTube AICP, and you may find some really great videos that can help with your studying. Next slide.
Oh. Sorry.
Oh, you clicked on it. I didn't know the link was active. That's my fault.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Just gonna go. Okay. Sorry.
There it is. Oh, dang it. Can you go back? Because I have some other things that I think we have on our study guide, but there are apps available. So I know that things have expanded since I was studying, but Quizlet or things that are similar to open resource, anybody is creating them. And I say that just as, kind of be aware that anybody is able to put that information up. So just double checking if information seems, I don't know if this is correct, to double check that, but there are different apps that can be downloaded that when you're on the go and you want to do some studying, you can, flashcards that are available where the question is on one, click it and it'll show you the answer, but that might be something that's helpful for people to do. And I see in the chat that, thank you for that link, Sophie. And it looks For the pricing that was put in, is this for APA and the
That's for
Planetizen?
Planetizen.
Okay, cool. Thank you for looking that up and putting that in there. So, okay, next slide. Now we can go. So these are just some feedback slides that we've gotten from past participants, sharing what worked for them when they were studying. So find a study buddy. Again, this is not a requirement, but it may be something helpful that, being able to identify and having a conversation with a planner friend of focus areas that maybe are not your strengths and things that you can discuss with someone to see a different perspective and focus on what you need to maybe look into a little more before exam time. Next slide. And this is not a quote from me, but it is something that very much resonates with me. I remember when I started studying for the exam, I felt like it helped me professionally, where I was able to kind of have a different perspective and see the more of the why I was doing things that I was doing. And yes, it's really great. It's fun to have letters behind your name, and it's a huge professional milestone. But maybe residual from studying will help you just, oh, that's why we do what we do. Okay, great. And next slide. This is probably our favorite. Memorization sucks for sure. But just think of it as this is only a temporary thing before you go into that exam and kill it, do a great job. But it's definitely something that you'll need to figure out what makes sense for you. I have a former colleague, whenever he was studying for the Code of Ethics, recorded himself saying the entire thing and played it every morning and evening on his way into work and way home, listened to it every day. I do recognize that the number of questions regarding the AICP Code of Ethics are relatively small in comparison to everything else, but he knew that was just something that was not sticking for him. So he came up with his own special way to remember it, and it worked for him. So just figure out what works for you and maybe make it a little bit fun, question mark. So next slide. And that's it. Wow.
So,
okay.
Here's our contact info. Please let us know if you did not get the resource list. So all the links that Morgan had in her section, we have all those, and we have specific links to many of the state chapters that kind of have the most resource material. And, links to a few other things that would be helpful for you. So if you didn't get that, let us know. We'll make sure to forward you that email. I guess I would open it up to folks if maybe you've taken the exam and weren't successful your first or second time. If there's things that you felt were good or bad, anything that you want to share. It's been a while since I've taken the exam, so I don't have as much current experience. Or if you've been studying for a bit, maybe you're taking the exam in this upcoming cycle. If there's things that we didn't cover that you think might be helpful for the rest of the group, would love to have you share that. Not to put anyone on the spot, but I'll open it up.
I mean, I'll share. It took, you all can hear me.
Yeah.
This is Mark. I took it back in November. I don't like to broadcast this, but I was off by 1 point.
That's crushing.
But I just felt like yes, for me the thing that I've learned that I should have done last time, did this time, was diversifying my studying methods and not relying on even the blue book alone, because it's a massive book. So like podcasts, listening to videos. I think the Florida APA has been a game changer, as well as your APA. And I think the other thing is to, when you're taking the exam, and it was exhausting, to really flag the ones that you really have no clue, and then come back to them. And then, because you're going to need to really pace yourself. So like do the ones that you can answer within a minute. And, you know, try to make sure, you know, if you can come back, if you do have any time left to go through all of the questions. But, you know, I was surprised how quickly the 3.5 hours went. So, yeah, I mean, I think that that was really the difference. And also like the experience, the more experience you have, the better it is. And also, I was kind of surprised. There really was only 2 or 3 questions on court cases. It was really heavy on communication and like plan implementation and community engagement. Like there were so many questions on that, like visioning and strategic planning. And so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Mark. I think a couple things that you said really resonated with me. Sort of the logistics piece. I love what you said about if you don't immediately know an answer, flag it. You can mark questions and come back to them. You won't waste time doing that. Sometimes there could be a subsequent question which helps you answer a previous question. And the other thing I think is that will give you more confidence. If you can, you know, get some questions that you're confident, you know, you get them under your belt, it'll boost your confidence. The one thing I will say is note that there are several different versions of the exam. So Mark just mentioned what his exam was really focused on. You might have a different experience. So just, you know, be as broad as you can. But that's really helpful. And also, you know that, I mean, everyone wants to pass the exam their first time. We want you to pass the exam your first time. Nationally, I mean, in Colorado, our rates are a little bit higher. In states, it kind of varies, but you know, generally about 1/3 of people don't pass their first time. And that's not, I'm not saying that to scare you. You know, in my study group, for example, I studied with 2 other men. 2 of us passed on our first time. One of us didn't pass, and he still hasn't ever gotten his AICP. He decided not to do it, and he's a phenomenal planner. So, you know, I think it just know that you're not. There's a lot of people that don't pass their first time and go on to be completely successful in passing their second or even third time. Nathan, you had a question on the all of the above, none of the above. I don't have any thoughts on that, if that's the way the questions are written. I'll be honest, I don't remember when I took the exam, if that was something that was there or not. You know, I think if you, I think it's sort of a catch-22, right? There's some utility in taking the exam right after graduation, because a lot of the facts and figures and stuff and test taking ability, like that's all fresh. I think to Mark's point, sometimes having the experience and being in the profession just gives you a lot of knowledge of how to and what to do. So I don't have any sense of the all of the above, none of the above. I don't know if folks who have taken the exam more recently than I have a sense.
They were mixed.
Okay.
And I just want to make this point really quick. The test is not intended, the way that the questions are written, the intent is for you to get it correct. It's not, it has not been written in a way to trick you, because that's not beneficial to anyone. So I just want to make that clear. Also, I failed to mention, whenever working through practice exams and quizzes, they are intentionally more difficult than the exam. And so that's all, Erin.
Morgan, are you okay with me just sharing? I'm just going to share a link to the Google Slides, Jerry.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it'll have our notes in there too. And by notes, it's like the correct answers. So I just shared that. You guys should, and anyone with a link should be able to access it. Maybe don't change it, because we use it, you know, annually, but. Any other questions or items that you want to talk? Otherwise, we can all move on with our Saturday in whatever time zone you're in. Please feel free to reach out to Morgan and I. The other thing I should have mentioned in the beginning, if there's something that you have a specific question on, like I really have a lot of questions about fill in the blank, environmental planning, or feel free to reach out to us and we can try to connect you with other folks that are in the chapter or the chapter that you may be in. There's a lot of knowledge and subject matter expertise and folks who are willing to share that. So, you know, I've had people contact me and say, like, I just really don't understand how to calculate FAR. Can you help me with this? And the answer is absolutely. And we'll walk through it and we'll do some examples. And if I'm not good at explaining it in a way that you understand, I'll connect you to someone else who might be better. So if you've got any specific questions or just feeling like it would make me feel a lot more confident if I could just talk to someone about level of service, we'll connect you back with Cass and you can really go through that. So please feel free to reach out to us. Our emails are here and we are happy to help. And that's a good point. If the AICP exam is anything like the landscape architecture exam, be detail oriented and critically think. That's correct. So take your time with the questions. And I think we saw that a little bit even in some of the questions, like there could be superfluous information. So really think about like, what is this question asking me? And what is the best answer here? Not what might work. What is the best answer? What is the question really asking? So I think that's a really great point, Bryn. Like read the question. If you're like, I don't understand what this is asking, just flag it and move on, and then come back to it. Okay. So I shared the presentation. You should all have the resource guide. Definitely check out the Florida stuff if you can. I mean, someone put it in the chat and I've heard this multiple times, like it is game changing. Their professional development officer is an incredible man. I think he might be finally retiring, but hopefully all of that body of knowledge will still be available to us because I've heard that is absolutely game changing. If there's anything else you have questions on, you've got our emails, contact us, contact each other. I know it looks like Sam and Cass are interested in potentially study groups. So feel free to reach out to these folks and wish you all the most success. And I can't wait to celebrate with you all soon as AICP candidates, AICP. And yeah, I don't know if you'll have access to this chat. That's a good question, Tanya. I can probably save the file. And then
yeah, I know that you can
give
do
you
it because I've had to
access.
do that for neighborhood meetings. You can, yeah.
And yes, we will share this recording. I will be completely transparent that I think someone else was recording at the beginning, and so I thought it was being recorded, so we missed a little bit of that. And I don't know if whoever was recording could send me the initial portion. I'm not sure. The small point is there may be a portion of this that is not recorded, so sorry about that. Okay. If anyone needs emails, contact me. I have the list and we can connect you if you don't have access to this chat. Good luck, everyone. You're going to do great.
Yes.
Take care.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.